This is Johnny Dosco. Stay tuned for another Score Sheet podcast. Holy Kadelka!
Good afternoon and welcome to another Score Sheet podcast. I'm happy to say that today we have as a guest Rob Gordon. Rob, for the last couple of years, has been the lead minor league analyst for baseballhq.com. How you doing today, Rob?
Pretty good, Jeff. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Good to have you. I was lucky enough to see Rod down at Baseball HQ's Arizona Fall League Conference. They put on a conference every year. In fact, we talked about it in a podcast a couple weeks ago. And Rod was down there telling people what minor leaguers to follow and which ones to stay away from. So I got to catch up with Rob. Let's say that, the thing that I've kind of always wondered about the minors is which stats guys like you or John Sickles use the most to project how a guy is going to do when he finally does get to the majors.
Right. Well, one of the most important things that I look at, especially for hitters, is to look at their walk rate and their plate discipline. So, looking at their strikeout to walk ratio and also the strikeout rate overall. And really, one of the things that I'm looking for, you can't completely tell with that stat, but one of the things that can help identify is whether the player is able to identify pitches that are coming in or not, and whether they're able to figure out what a ball and strike is. So somebody like Josh Vitters, who we've seen in the Arizona Fall League, he can almost hit anything, but he has no idea what is a good pitch or what a strike is necessarily. And so, although he doesn't strike out a lot, he almost never walks. And so, looking at that plate discipline and trying to find somebody who is got a really good walk rate, and I think there's a definite correlation between having a good walk rate and a good plate discipline and being able to hit for a high average in the majors. So for hitters, that's one of the first things that I look at. Obviously, I like to see power, too. Last year, I was pretty high on this guy, Nolan Arenado, who was down in the Fall League this year, in part because in 2010, he had 41 doubles in the South Atlantic League. He only had 11 home runs, but he had 41 doubles. And so, and he was only 19 years old. So being able to project that and say, here's a guy who's 19, he's got 41 doubles, some of those doubles are going to turn into home runs. And sure enough, this year he had 20 home runs, and I think that's a trend that's just going to continue. So looking at power, plate discipline, for pitchers, obviously, control, not walking a lot of guys. I'd much rather have a guy like Robbie Erlin from the Padres, who's got a real good walk ratio, rather than striking out a ton of guys. For me, I'd rather see a guy who can throw strikes. The strikeouts will come, and strikeouts are nice and everything, but if you can't find the strike zone, once you get to the major leagues, hitters are just going to tear you up. So those are the things that I tend to look for. So
you're not a big fan of the really high strikeout pitcher in the minor leagues if he's also walking a lot of guys?
No, take that guy Nate Eovaldi for the Dodgers last year, who he pitched reasonably well after the Dodgers called him up, and I think his strikeout to walk ratio was like 1-to-1 basically. And I'm not, he had a sub-4 ERA, but I'm not at all convinced that going forward over the course of a whole season next year that he's going to be able to maintain that. I'd rather see a guy. I mean, the strikeouts are nice. Don't get me wrong. I mean, if a guy's striking out 10 guys per 9 innings and only walking a couple guys, that's ideal. But I'd almost rather see a guy that strikes out 7 or 8 guys per 9 innings and only walks a couple, rather than a guy who strikes out 10 or 11 but also is walking 6 or 7.
That's my problem, is that I pay too much attention to raw strikeout totals and not nearly enough attention to walks.
Well, and it's the strikeouts that get all the notoriety. The guys, like Garrett Cole that we saw down in the Fall League, can throw 100 miles an hour and strike people out, but he also can't always find the strike zone. And so the upside for a guy like Garrett Cole is much higher than it is for somebody like Robbie Erlin. But the likelihood that guy's going to come in and have immediate success in the major is actually probably smaller. A guy who's got good control is probably going to come in and initially have more success than a guy who's got good stuff but maybe is all over the place.
Huh. Yeah, Garrett Cole, well, we saw that game together at the Arizona Fall League, the All-Star game, where, what did he, 2/3 of an inning, five runs, 2 long home runs?
The first inning.
Yeah, that wasn't too good. Well, Pittsburgh has pretty much zero track record of high first-round pitchers doing well for them.
Yeah, no, I can't remember the last guy that they sort of hit on that did well in the major leagues. That was a pitching prospect that they drafted.
Yeah, no, they've got far more flameouts. Though Vogelsong finally, about 12 years after they drafted him, he finally had a good year.
Yeah, maybe that's the key. You just have to wait a decade, right?
Well, then leave Pittsburgh, go to Japan, bounce around. So back to the minor league. So you look for more of a strikeout to walk ratio than you do just strikeout per inning.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that I look at is batting average against, and so occasionally you'll see a guy who's got good stuff, has a decent strikeout rate, but also is hitters are hitting like 280 against him, and that makes me a little bit nervous because he's on the one hand he's getting some strikeouts, but he's not missing as many bats as what you would really like. I'd rather have a guy around a 200 or a 220 batting average against. And I don't think people really look at that very often, but I actually think that that's a fairly critical stat that you could look at. And you want to have strikeout rate too, but if you have a strikeout rate with the low batting average against, I think that that's a really good combination.
And then I assume in the minor leagues, even more so in the majors, you don't pay a whole lot of attention to ERA and certainly not to wins and losses when you're evaluating a minor league pitcher.
No, I mean I don't look at wins and losses at all. I mean, occasionally it's interesting. You see somebody like Julio Teheran from the Atlanta Braves who went 15-3 last year. I don't know, something like that gets your attention a little bit. I mean, just like somebody getting a lot of RBIs every year in the minors. I mean, there is something about being able to win games that does translate, at some level. But a lot of that is so fluky, just like it is at the major league level. The team could be really, I mean, you could be surrounded by a bunch of crappy, minor league guys who are going nowhere. The guy might have a terrific ERA. I'd pay much more attention to the ERA than I would for wins and losses. But even the ERA can fluctuate based on the team's defense or the pitching environment that they're in. So I really look at that strikeout to walk ratio and then batting average against.
Right. Well, and also with ERA, the minor leagues, there's quite a difference between the different minor leagues. Just in some are pitcher friendly, some are hitter friendly. The park effects.
Right. Yeah, especially like a league like the Cal, which is a very favorable hitting environment, versus the Midwest League, which is a very favorable pitching environment. But they're both they're comparable. One's low A, one's high A. So a guy could go to high A and just tear it up in the Cal, and then the next year in Double A, he's totally back to normal again.
And then of course there's the whole age thing. Depending on what a 19-year-old in Double A is a pretty exciting thing. A 20.
Yeah, and that's. I mean, I think that's probably as important as any other stat that you might look at is the age to to the level that they're at, and what kind of competition are they playing against. That's why everybody's been so high on Bryce Harper for so long. Is he was a 17-year-old playing in a wood bat junior college league against 21-year-olds, and then went right into low A as an 18-year-old against again older competition and more than held his own. So those are things I think that are really key is looking at a guy. Sometimes questions about guys like, well, about this guy, Eddie Van Slyke, his son Scott Van Slyke hit 25 home runs last year, but he's 25 years old. So I mean I don't know how much upside a guy like that would have. I'd rather have a guy who's 19 or 20 or young for the competition that he's playing against.
Yeah, well, getting back to like Garrett Cole, he pitched at UCLA. He's already, 22, 23 years old, 22. I think.
Yeah, he's 22.
So you'd like to see him develop fairly fast if he's going to really live up to being a top pick of a draft.
Yeah, I would think, right. And college guys, that's the nice thing about college pitchers is they usually do move up pretty quickly. There were a couple of cases last year where guys, didn't spend hardly any time at all in the minors and were up and pitching. And so I would think that if Garrett Cole is going to start to live up to that potential, I would think he'd need to be up by the end of this year, by the end of 2012, and start doing something for the Pirates.
Yeah, well, they certainly have room for him in their rotation if he does well.
Yeah, and obviously they're not going to rush him, and maybe he needs a little bit more time in the minors to sort of get things under control. But I mean, you pay a guy $8 million, the fans are going to want to see they're going to want to see this guy sooner rather than later, right?
Yeah, and I'm not going to sit here and say that, he's a flop just because I saw him get shelled in one game at the AFL. Though I must admit, it was a pretty memorable shellacking he took.
Well, he's got good stuff. I think he'll actually be fine. He's got 3 good pitches, and he does have a fastball that can top out at 100. I don't think there's any concerns. It's just I think when you look at him compared to some other guys who maybe went second, third, fourth in the draft, you have to wonder how quickly he's going to realize that potential, I think.
Yeah. Well, on the flip side, we saw Danny Holtzen down there also, who was, the second pick, I think, in the draft from Seattle?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was talking about. I mean, actually, I think at this point I'd rather have Holtzen. He's kind of got a funky delivery. He's a lefty, but, he really can locate well, and he keeps the ball down, and he knows what he's doing. And so, he kind of cruised through the first, inning and a half or whatever 2 innings that he went. He'll actually probably be up sooner than Cole, and initially have a little bit better success.
But as you said, his upside, he doesn't have the 100-mile-an-hour fastball. So while he probably, if you're looking for a pitcher for your fantasy team to help you out in the early part of 2012, he's probably more likely. But if you want a guy who might win a Cy Young in 2014, maybe Cole is the better bet.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, it's the difference, like Garrett Cole, everything comes together. He's got, Justin Verlander kind of stuff, right? Danny Hulton doesn't have that. So, he's more like a 90 to 93, 94 mile an hour fastball. A good pitcher to have, but not a top of the rotation stud kind of guy.
Right. Well, neither one of them probably is the next Strasburg.
No, I mean, those guys don't come along, those guys don't come around that often. And Strasburg's just, so physical, and although people did talk about Cole, like, having that kind of stuff, I personally don't see that. But, people have compared him to Verlander and to Strasburg, so.
Well, I mean, Strasburg came back, last year. I think everybody's thinking, well, I wonder how he's going to do when he first comes back after Tommy John. And, I mean, he just looked like Cy Young himself his first game back.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fun to see a guy like that, come in and after the surgery, look like, he hadn't missed a beat and like you said, have that kind of fantastic stuff.
So we've mentioned Harper. Of course, everybody's kind of heard of Harper, Mike Trout. But will some of the guys either from the AFL or maybe from AA that you think might surprise some people even be up in 2012?
Yeah, I mean, I think, every year it's interesting because if you look at who won this year, the Rookie of the Year award, it's all about opportunity, right? And so that's hard to tell. Is Ivan Nova going to get a chance to sneak into the starting at the beginning of the year? I don't think anyone really thought that he would have won that many games and been that good. So a lot of it comes down to opportunity. But, there's definitely some guys I think to keep an eye on. It's interesting, the Chris Iannetta trade that just happened. Rockies have a really good catcher, Willen Rosario, who's got a fantastic arm. I think every year for the last 3 years he's thrown out about 40 to 45% of the base runners that have tried to steal against him. He's got good power. Not sure if he's going to hit for average, but I could easily see him getting a chance to really win the starting catching job for the Rockies this spring, and be a catcher who's maybe not a great hitter, but might hit 20 home runs for you. Again, another catcher for the Reds, Devin Mesoraco, who was down in the fall League 2 years ago. We saw him down there. Very good power, had a breakout season in 2010, and had a really good follow-up this year. And people are talking about him as being a possible middle-of-the-order run producer. In most leagues, if you can get a catcher like that can hit 270 to 280 with 25, 30 home runs, that has a lot of value. So I like those guys in the National League. Obviously, there's a bunch of pitchers. Trevor Bauer from Arizona I really like. Drew Pomeranz came up at the end of last year, a lefty for Colorado. I think he has a real good chance. Be interesting to see what the Cubs do with the new management. I've been waiting for them to give Brett Jackson probably their best position prospect, an outfielder. He spent some time at AAA last year, so I think he's really ready to go. But it'll be interesting to see if he actually gets a chance to play or not. In the American League, there's this guy, a relief pitcher I really like, Addison Reed for the White Sox. Just a great strikeout to walk ratio. Really good stuff. Pitched at 4 different levels last year, and I can see him coming up and surprising. The Twins have a couple guys. Liam Hendricks is a right-handed pitcher, got a little bit of action last year. And Joe Benson is a center fielder with kind of nice power-speed mix that might surprise some people next year.
Well, that's a pretty good list of guys.
Yeah.
And like you said, if you can draft a catcher who's in AA now, and in a year he's batting .270 with 20 homers, any fantasy team could sure as heck use a guy like that.
Yeah, no, and I think especially teams with leagues where you have to have two catchers, having a solid catcher with power is really, even if he's not hitting 300, a guy like that, it has quite a bit of value.
Because in straight rotisserie leagues, some of them need two catchers. In score sheet, for all practical purposes, you need two catchers because when we play simulated games, you're limited by a guy's real life playing time, and no catcher in real life gets more than really roughly 450 at bats. I mean,
right.
Even that's pretty much on the high side. They rest a couple days a week. So having a good second catcher, even if you already have Posey or Maurer or somebody, it never hurts.
Right, and especially if you can get them young and while they're inexpensive and and hopefully they blossom and turn into good players.
Yeah, well, and the opportunity, I like that guy we've mentioned before, Arenado. Colorado at the moment doesn't have a third baseman that can really hit.
Right. No, and what I've been hearing is that they're going to give him a legitimate chance to win that job next year in the spring, which I think would be really interesting because he only played a little bit at AA. I don't think he played. I think he was in the Cal League all year this year, and so going from that to he had a really good fall league. I mean, he won the surprised, I guess, if he actually was given a chance to win the starting job next year. But he looked really good.
Yeah, well, it's not like it was decades ago when you kind of went up one level a year in the minors. They do rush people up these days if they have a place for them.
Yeah, they do. Sometimes you wonder whether that's a wise strategy, or they know. The Tigers had Jacob Turner up, their top pitching prospect, for a couple starts last year, and he just looked really overmatched.
Or you can do what the Giants did to Brandon Belt, where you bounce him up, bounce him down, throw in a position change on top of that, and by the end of the year, the guy looks like a total mess.
Yeah, I thought they handled that not the best. To have him come out and say that he's their starting first baseman, and then he got all 50 at bats, and then they send him back down and change his position, and like you said, he looked really like a mess by the end of the year.
Yeah, I think to move a guy from first base to left field when he hasn't played left field since I think it was high school or something, and like you said, 50 at bats. That's, if you're a veteran player and you go in a slump for 50 at bats, nobody even notices. I'm a big Giants fan. I'm really not a big Brian Sabean fan, though. We did win a World Series, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you also, did you guys still write a minor league analyst book for Baseball HQ?
Yes, we're knee deep in that as we speak. So I do the National League guides for the book, and we're right now in the midst of doing our top 15 organization reports, and then writing up the player reports for the book. And so it's a labor of love, but it's definitely a lot of work.
Yeah, well, I like that because it's a very analytical book. Baseball HQ has been very number-oriented, analytical for, I guess Ron's been doing that. Ron Chandler's the one that started that baseballhq.com, and I think this is their 24th or 25th year doing it now.
Yeah, 25 years, I think, is where he's at this point.
Yeah, so that's pretty good. But you guys are, I know for years now, you guys have kind of used sabermetrics on the minor leaguers too, which is kind of a nice thing to be able to access.
Yeah, we do. We try to blend, an actual scouting report, so we have, try to watch as many of the players as we can possibly see, to have some real scouting reports to go along with the statistics that we use. But yeah, we use some of the same sabermetric tools that Baseball HQ uses in terms of, strikeout to walk ratio and batting eye and plate discipline and those kinds of things. And then we kind of come up with a grade for each player and sort of give our readers an idea of like scale of 1 to 10. Where is this guy at, and what's the likelihood that he's actually going to reach that potential. So that's one of the interesting things about the book, is that we try to give a grade that is kind of a shorthand for where the player is at this point.
So if I'm interested in one guy, I can dive into depth and read his pitcher eye and stuff, but if I just kind of want to real quickly go, okay, what second baseman do I want to pick, I can kind of cheat and just go, oh, this guy's got a 9.
Yeah, absolutely. So we give, basically the scale is 1 to 10. 10 player, which we almost never give out as a potential Hall of Fame player. A 9 is like an elite major leaguer. An 8 is a solid major league regular, and a 7 is a sort of average major league regular. And then we give like A through E whether the player is actually, how likely it is to reach that potential. Because you might have a guy who, like Louis Radia for Pittsburgh, like this 17, 18-year-old guy with a fantastic arm, but he has no idea where he's throwing the ball, right? And so ideally, if he figures it out, he's still pretty young. If he figures it out, he could be a 9. He could be an elite major league regular. But right now, I'd say he's like either a D or an E in terms of the likelihood of being able to do that. So a D is like 20% chance, and E is about 10% chance of reaching that potential. So one of the things that we get a lot of questions about is what's the difference between a guy who's say an 8B? Is that guy better or worse than the guy who's a 9D? It really kind of depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for more of a sure thing, then a guy who's an 8D is actually probably a better bet than the guy who's a 9, in terms of the potential, but maybe not going to live up to that potential.
Well, that is a nice that you give both ratings, because, if you're a fantasy leaguer, it probably depends where you are in the draft. If you're using your last dollar and you're willing to gamble on a guy, or you're down in the 34th round of a draft, you might want to take the high upside guy, because if it doesn't work out, you really haven't lost anything. But
right.
If you really,
it depends on the position too. Like if you're looking for a second baseman, there just aren't a lot of elite second base prospects, and so okay, maybe we're not looking for a 9, but you want a guy who's likely to actually live up to that potential and is close to playing. And so you'll take a guy who's an 8B or an 8C, because you need somebody to come up and actually play position rather than somebody that you're stashing away for the next 5 years or something.
Great. And when does that book usually come out?
It's going to come out late January.
So that's in plenty of time for people to do drafts.
Oh yeah. It's definitely in time for spring training and drafts and all that.
Huh. And then people buy it on the Baseball HQ website is the best place to get a link to buy it?
Yep, because you get it direct. You also get any updates that we do. We send everybody who buys the book an updated top 100 prospect list as spring training's rolling around. And then any updates if there are trades or, organizational changes as we get closer to spring training, we send an update on that stuff.
In fact, I probably should let you get back to writing the book. But first, are you going to – I know you're a huge – well, you work at the University of Michigan, so you're a huge Wolverine fan. You're still probably a little giddy about beating Ohio State.
Very much so.
Where are you guys going for a bowl game, you think?
I don't know. I would love to see a Michigan-Stanford matchup, and I think Michigan would probably lose that, but it's just something, about two academically oriented schools playing in a bowl game, in similar sides. It's interesting why Stanford this year, they've really sort of been more of a grinded-out Big Ten kind of team rather than, an Oregon kind of run all over the place kind of team. So I think that'd be an interesting matchup. I think Michigan probably got a little bit lucky this year with their schedule, but nice to see things turning around after a couple years of disappointment.
Yeah, you were never much of a Rich Rodriguez fan, I know.
No, I was not.
Yeah, well, now I'm a Pac-12 guy being a Cal grad, so now I'm stuck watching my team compete against him. Hopefully he'll have the same incredible lack of success now that he's with Arizona.
Yeah.
Well, hey, it was great talking to you, Rob, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Great job. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
All right, thank you.